And we've got the local author and historian Oliver Crocker joining us a little bit later on. He's ghostwritten the memoir of the flying squad detective Barry Appleton, who was famous for being the right side of the law at the time the Krays brothers and everybody else were the wrong side of the law. Local author and historian Oliver Crocker is with us after 12 today. He's here because he's just had published a new best-selling memoir of the former flying squad detective Barry Appleton. So it's called 20th Century Cop, and it's about this particular person's life and times. This rather well-known copper, actually, who later became a scriptwriter for The Bill, but as a crime fighter was involved in notorious names in his 20-year career with the Met. He's still alive, actually, so Oliver has spent a long time researching this story and speaking with the former detective Barry Appleton, whose story we'll hear just after 12 o'clock here on BBC Radio Cambridgeshire. Looking forward to that on BBC Radio Cambridgeshire. 14 minutes past 12. It's the 10th of June today, Wednesday, the 10th of June on the daytime show. It's Sue hosting, not Chris today, who's back tomorrow. Former flying squad detective Barry Appleton is the subject of a new book by local author and historian Oliver Crocker, who joins us. He was the copper who was the right side of the law, where the Krays and all the wrong uns were the wrong side of the law. And Oliver is here. Morning.
Good morning, Sue.
Or afternoon, as we are now.
Thank you for having me.
We're the other side of that line, aren't we? So, Barry Appleton, am I misremembering this? Is he the copper that the Krays publicly, in some cases, said that they had a bit of a grudging admiration for?
No, that was Nipper Read, although Barry served under Nipper Read, and Nipper Read was very instrumental in promoting Barry through the ranks. Barry finished off as a detective inspector in the Met. Okay. But Barry was in the very early days. He really saw the rise and fall of the Krays, literally on the East End streets of London as a bobby on the beat. Joined the Met in 1957, and he first met Reggie in a boxing gym, quite by accident, not knowing who it was he was talking to. And then he went on multiple raids to their house in Valence Road, where the Krays' mum used every word under the sun to get them to go out. You know, they were positioning themselves initially. Their older brother Charles actually had an advert in the Stage. He was trying to set himself up as a showbiz manager. Yeah. So they were going to showbiz parties, to movie premieres, and Barry and his colleagues would be sent undercover to keep an eye on them, as to what they were doing, who were they mingling with. You talk about the social circles, about how they met in the gym, but that would have been true of, probably true now, of the people who sit one side of the line and the people who sit the other side of the line. Actually, this is a very esoteric question here, but there's a lot of overlap. Yeah, there was a pub in the East End where the cops and the villains, they would sit, they would drink. It would be
what, different ends of the bar.
Yeah, there'd be a bit of crossover. Information was shared. Yeah. It was a different world. A dangerous world. Barry. Some of his stories are absolutely extraordinary. He was one of the first British police officers to be involved in a shootout on the streets of London, where shots were fired. That's when he joined the flying squad. He received a commendation for his courage that day. That's our opening prologue of the book, where we just, set the scene.
It's a good place to start from, isn't it?
every day he wouldn't know what was going to happen that day, and there's rooftop chases, there's car chases, there's stakeouts.
It sounds a lot like a 1970s cop show on the telly, doesn't it?
It does. Well, in fact, Dennis Waterman and John Thor, before they joined the Sweeney, before they started shooting, were sent on attachment to shadow the flying squad. And it was with Barry's unit, 5 Squad. So Dennis Waterman was paired with Barry. And
it wasn't so far from fact.
Oh no! And those two actors drank that squad under the table in the tank, which was the bar underneath Scotland Yard. They knew what they were around a pub.
I bet they did. Let's rewind a little, because he started as a bobby on the beat, but he wasn't from London. But interestingly, he joined the Met. So how did he come to go from Welsh Wales all the way up to the capital?
That's right. Initially, as he found when he got there, a lot of young men at that time, it was a way out of national service. So as a cadet, at 17, he went down. They were quite an interesting, eclectic bunch of guys, not who you might normally assume would be police officer material. But he really took to it like a duck to water, Barry. Very bright man, very quiet, a Christian. So he always found he was quite at odds, his personality, with the fact that, he was a law enforcement officer, armed, but then he would quietly, on his beat, if he found a church, he would go in and have a quiet pray. Quite an interesting officer, a family man as well. He had a wife, Pam, and 2 young children at home, and there's always that worry, am I going to make it home to them tonight? And that was his main thing in his job, especially in dangerous situations. I've just got to get home to them. So yeah, he worked his way up quite quickly from a Bobby on the beat. He had a huge arrest rate, and we've gone through finding women who were hiding drugs in a Bible with a hole in the middle of it, There's a case of a gentleman doing a robbery in a very fetching hat and an even more fetching car. So he stood out like a sore thumb, But then he joined the aid squad on City Road, which were a band of 20 officers who were literally sent out plain clothes, crime prevention, whether it's pickpockets.
Which was very innovative at the time, yeah.
Yeah, and Barry, innovation, he was the first officer to actually recommend CCTV in interview rooms, and he got a commendation for that. He was like, well, these interviews should be recorded, which in this era, the 1970s in the flying squad, was really ahead of its time. So a very thoughtful man. And I first met Barry because he went on to be a scriptwriter on the bill and the original police advisor. And so I initially interviewed him as a TV historian about his work on the bill. And then he said, well, would you be interested in being my ghostwriter? Because I've got 20 years of police stories.
I'm just thinking you've written one book of his, but you could probably write 20.
Oh, there's so many stories he's got. And some of them we've obviously had to be mindful. I mean, my job is to...
Even now, there's some stories you probably can't tell every bit of.
Can't tell. There's either cold cases or still cases that are ongoing. We've obviously had to change certain names. But cases where it's been recorded and I've been able to verify events. I mean, Barry's 86 now, but his memory from events 60 years ago was uncannily sharp. Yeah. And he's a marvellous man. He lives out in Cyprus now. So we did over 20 hours of interviews over Zoom. And then I went away and verified the facts. And some of these... it's not easy reading about, gangland killings. If you start researching the Krays online, you're going to see some pretty horrifying images, which are just there. But obviously, these are all human beings, the victims in their own right. You've got to tell their story with sensitivity and thought. But yeah, we've been able to actually reveal some new information on, the murder of Ginger Marks, his body has never been found. But Barry actually searched his flat on the night he was shot outside a Krays bar and discovered evidence that suggested he was an FBI informant, which ultimately Barry feels is what cost him his life. When Ronnie Kray shot George Cornell at the Blind Beggar, which is a very famous case, many people think that Cornell was killed at the scene, but he actually was alive, and Barry had to accompany Cornell to the hospital where doctors tried to save him. And he was there to protect him in case any associates were sent back to finish the job. So it's just all these incredible instances from a foot soldier who was there. And it has been able to, it's such an evocative era, 60s London. And he was once sent out to arrest a Kray henchman, a nasty piece of work called Dixon, whose weapon of choice was a razor blade, and Barry had to go out single-handedly bring him in. There's no handcuffs, there's no radio, there's no backup. He just had to bring him in, and there's this extraordinary standoff in a street between Dixon, Barry, and Reggie Kray. Barry said it was bandit country. He was on his own. There's people watching. There's a crowd watching. What's going to happen to this copper,
And the fact that he emerged out of it is a testament to his policing skills.
Oh, as I walked into the studio, you were playing Holding Out for a Hero by Bonnie Tyler, and it just felt really appropriate because these guys were so brave. They modelled themselves on errant knights on white chargers. They wanted to go in, save the day, arrest the bad guys, and it was proactive policing. They would go on a stakeout for days because they thought, especially in the flying squad where robberies were concerned, could be like he worked on the Bank of America, £8 million robbery.
I should imagine the flying squad hand-picked its officers. So how did he make the transition from uniform?
It was Nipper Read. He'd got a lot of commendations for his arrest rate and thought, okay, you'd make a good detective. So he moved to being a detective. He was first on the scene for the murder of the playwright Joe Orton. We've explored that in the book. And when it came to going on to the flying squad, it was Tommy Butler, who was a detective chief superintendent, who recognised Barry's arrest rate and his commendations. And the first thing he had to do on the flying squad was go undercover to investigate the assassination of Martin Luther King. Because James Earl Ray was arrested at an airport with a false passport. He was trying to flee. And so he was held at Cannon Row Police Station, and Barry was sent in undercover as a fellow prisoner to try to find out if Ray had any accomplices. And he said, he'd go home every night and say to his wife, Pam, staring into the steel cold eyes of a killer, completely devoid of life. And he's never forgotten those eyes. And they still haunt him, having to be that close. And he'd have to work out with this guy, and he'd have to pretend he was in there he would have all his own backstory of list of crimes that he was being investigated for.
Let's hold on that story for a moment. His is a life in two parts in many ways, because he later became quite a successful TV writer as well. And you've said that's initially how you got to know him, through his work writing many episodes of The Bill. Brilliant. We'll talk on that in a moment on BBC Radio Cambridgeshire after this. Oliver Crocker's alongside, ghostwriter and TV historian, and you were telling us that Barry Appleton and your contact with him really came through the work that he's done as a scriptwriter on The Bill, one of my favourite TV shows through the late 80s, 90s into the noughties.
It was amazing, wasn't it?
He wrote many episodes, didn't he? Or he was consulted.
So Barry had never written a script in his life and sent a letter to Thames Television to say, if you ever need a police advisor, and it landed on it landed on the desk of Michael Chapman, who had just been commissioned to do the pilot called Wooden Top. So Barry went down when it was made in Teddington Studios, 1983, and advised on the pilot. It then got a commission for a 12-part series, and Barry was asked to be the advisor. And Michael Chapman, over a beer, it's all very, very casual, not like today with the commissioning process, just said, Barry, you got any ideas for stories? And he got a commission for 2 episodes right there and then. He went on to write 50 episodes. And this is a time, I grew up with The Bill in the mid-90s when it was on 3 times a week, car chases, action, Yeah,
it had one of the best opening sequences of any long-running programme, didn't it?
With the feet
those opening credits,
And the feet on the cobbles would have been shot on a day like today, because the cobbles were always wet.
Always wet,
Reflect the light.
Wet London streets.
Yeah. But those original episodes, which I hadn't seen because I was too young to see them, they were on at 9 o'clock. They were brutal. They were gritty. There's swearing. There's nudity. It's not like The Bill that we became a family staple.
Became a bit more soap, didn't it?
Yes, it did later on in order to survive. But those early episodes are so gripping. And Barry's a massive reason for that, because he based his scripts on his original cases, his experience.
Stories he'd worked on, situations he'd worked through.
And characters. He created the character of PC Pete Ramsey, who was played by Nick Redding, marvellous actor. And Barry used some of his own experiences, to create Ramsey, who was a bit of a bad boy, a bit flash, drove a second-hand Porsche, as Barry did later in life.
2 weeks ago, we had Simon Rouse on.
The legend.
Who was DCI Meadows.
He certainly was for 20 years.
We didn't even talk about The Bill.
Such a marvellous
that's
career.
where people would probably most readily recognise him from.
Yeah, because the show is still being shown on You and Drama. It's got a massive following. It's still huge in Australia, where the actors are still treated like royalty. I've produced a podcast about The Bill for the last 9 years, which has been played over 500,000 times. It's the love for these actors. And so from my perspective as a TV historian, I like to celebrate not just the making of the show, but the makers of the show. And so it's been such a privilege to speak to these people. But Barry and I we had a lovely bond, and he had so many interesting stories. And it was as a result of interviewing him for a couple of witness statements books about the early days of The Bill that he said, would you like to be my ghostwriter? And I was so privileged. I've learned a lot. Which
obviously took you, as you were saying, back into his policing career. 20 years he spent with the Met. Why did he step back from policing at the time he did? Is there a neat answer to that?
Yeah, he was almost killed in the line of duty. He spent months in hospital. He was almost paralyzed in a pub brawl. He broke up a pub brawl and was hit over the back with a stool. Yeah, it took him many months to recover and learn to walk again. He then went back to the flying squad, promoted to detective sergeant. He then got promoted to detective inspector, and he'd done 20 years, and the job was getting more dangerous. One of the last cases Barry worked on was the manhunt for the killer of PC Stephen Tibble, who was an off-duty police officer who was shot dead by an IRA terrorist in 1975. That really shook the policing community. And when Barry had the chance to actually become an inspector for the flying squad, his wife Pam just pleaded with him, said, "You've done 20 years, you've almost been killed once, you've got 2 young children." And so it was very difficult for him to put his papers in, because he was an excellent copper. He cared passionately about law enforcement, but his family were everything to him. They were his priority. And so they shut up shop, they bought a pub, and they were running a pub, and someday some film students came in, and he asked them if any of them would like a part-time job working in the bar. And one of them had a girlfriend called Teresa Howard, who's a playwright of huge note now, and she was just starting out as an agent. And she said, "Barry, you've got so many stories, you should be a writer."
Yeah.
And he'd never even thought about it. Yeah. And so it was thanks to Teresa who planted this seed, and he went away, he bought a second-hand typewriter. So it's something very, on the cover, we've got his Smith & Wesson revolver and a second-hand Victorian typewriter. Yeah. And those are the two
key tools.
His 2 weapons of choice. Yeah. And the feet on the cover, which is recreating the famous feet on the bill end credits, are actually my wife Tessa's feet on the original cobbles in Richmond-on-Thames.
I've gone down a wee rabbit hole here because I've just run a search for the main characters in the bill, because I can remember off the top of my head quite a few of them. It was Superintendent Meadows.
Yeah.
Not DCI. I don't know where I got that from.
Well, he started as DCI.
Oh, was that it?
Well, in fact, he started as superintendent, then he got knocked down to DCI.
Yeah.
See, initially he was a guest character.
Some of them moved up and down, didn't they?
They did.
Don Beach.
The mighty Billy Murray.
Yeah. Who else did we have? Burnside.
Chris Ellison. And
Frank Burnside, yeah.
I mean, Barry loved writing for Burnside. Barry created the character of D.S. Alistair Gregg, who was the clarinet-playing Scotsman, played by Andrew McIntosh, on his first episode.
I don't remember that.
He says to Burnside, "I'm sorry, I can't come on that Obogov, I've got a gig." And Burnside said, "A gig? I'll give you a gig."
He was no nonsense, wasn't he?
Oh, he was amazing.
June Ackland, Sergeant Ackland.
Wonderful Trudy Goodwin.
Absolutely. Was there a Viv someone as well?
Viv Martella.
WPC Viv Martella. And yes. She was a bit, I can't be doing with this, isn't she?
She was amazing.
And loads of other characters over the years that came and went.
Well, in her final episode, it was the highest rated episode ever. 18 million viewers tuned in. You know, at the time, the bill was getting more viewers than EastEnders. It was the #1 show on British television. And yeah, people still miss it, and people still watch the repeats. Yeah. And what's great about 20th Century Cop is to explore episodes of the bill that people know and love, and actually talk about the real life cases that went into them. So there was an episode called Country Cousin that Barry wrote, where a visiting detective has to come down to Sun Hill and bring a villain back up to Yorkshire, his native town. Well, that was based on a real life case where Barry was sent down to Bristol to collect the Gentle Giant. And the Gentle Giant made an outstandingly ambitious attempt at escaping Barry's clutches. There was a story where June Ackland visits an old lady, and she said, "Well, there was a bogus gasman in my house," and it turns out that the gasman is locked in the cellar, and that was based on a real case that Barry went to. He said, "Well, what happened to him?" "Oh, he's down here. I wasn't going to let him go."
And we could talk endlessly about this. DC Jim Carver, Tony Stamp.
Oh, Graham,
of course.
Graham Cole.
Graham Cole, yeah. Bob Cryer, Sergeant Bob Cryer.
Yeah. Eric and Barry used to go drinking together because they're huge motorbike aficionados. And Barry always remembers during the second series, when the bill, obviously in the first series, no one knew what they were shooting, but it quickly became this hit. And Eric, they were in a pub talking about scripts for the next season, And some autograph hunters came over to meet Eric, and Eric says, you want to get this man's autograph because he's the person who writes our scripts. And so there was an awful lot of love in the early days between Barry, because he was such a great writer. The actors were buying him drinks because they'd just taken out a mortgage and didn't want to be written out.
They were being fed the most amazing plot lines and dialogue, weren't they?
And it was all grounded in reality from someone who'd been there and done the job himself. And that's why and then he went on to write Taggart, where he could just let his imagination fly.
You'll have to come back and talk to Chris Mann about that sometime, him being a Glaswegian.
Oh, I'd be delighted.
We'll set that up. We need to call time here for now, but thank you so much for coming in, Oliver Crocker.
Thank you, Sue, for
20th Century Cop by Barry Appleton, but written by you as well, is out now. And we haven't got round to talking about Bright Spark. You've been working on the autobiography of the repair shop's Mark Stuckey.
I certainly have.
Who's quite local to us, I hear.
Well, he used to work in Fluke, which is next door to this studio.
Really, really local, yeah. That's where he learned to solder, presumably, literally next door.
And he used to build chemical weapons systems. He had an entire career as a magician that no one knows about. So that's all in Bright Spark coming out in September.
We're halfway to booking him already. Thank you for coming in.
Oh, thank you for
having
me.
Me.
I'd love to. And if I could give a quick shout out to my mummy Lynn, my mother-in-law. She's just come out of hospital. She used to work at BBC Radio. Mummy Lynn, I love you.
Really? And anyone else who knows you? Anyone else who knows you? Thank you ever so much for coming in. Everyone, this has been Oliver Crocker and his mum on BBC Radio Cambridgeshire. 22 minutes to